Glad. Okay. So welcome everybody. I know more people may join us in person and online as the evening progresses, but Dr. Schnarr, I don't want to, monopolize your time. Um, so September was an amazing month for our advocacy efforts. If you didn't get a chance to watch all 5 hours of the assembly hearing, it is available online. And I mean, there was some absolutely amazing testimony. Like the lawmakers were asking a lot of really thoughtful questions, and I think that they're really, they want to make sure that we're doing this right. And I feel like we are. I feel like we have the right people lined up, and we have the right resources in the room. Uh, that hearing was on September 30th, and the Friday before that, there was a fundraising dinner down in Soho that was put on by a group called the Microdosing Collective. And if you haven't looked up the Microdosing Collective, they're some amazing folks. They're mostly out in the West Coast, and they helped fund the efforts in California that passed both the House and the Senate, but then Gavin Newsom vetoed. So they were a little bit disheartened about what was happening out there. They met Allison Hoots at, I think, a psychedelic science conference in Colorado, and I think it was somebody that's in there as another lawyer, and we started meeting with them a couple months ago, and they were like, oh, what you guys are doing in New York shows a lot of promise. And I will say that the bill that Assemblymember Amy Paulin and Senator Julia Salazar have introduced was inspired by the failed effort in California, because one of the things that Newsom said was that it lacked consumer education. That's why we were like, oh, we need to build in some kind of way for consumers to know counterindicators, like set and setting, dosage protocols, and all these things. And so that was one of the really important facets for our team when we were helping advise Amy Paulin about what this bill should look like. So they are really excited about the A2142 style of access, and they're helping us put together another dinner. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to give Dr. Schnarr, Dr. Bianca Schnarr, the floor. She was the first testifier at the hearing, and she gave a little bit of a synopsis about what happens in the brain. And I was like, this is exactly, several people who have come to these meetings have said, oh, can somebody help us understand what is going on with our serotonin receptors? And I'm sure you're going to have do a much better job at explaining it. I think I need to share. You have a presentation, right? So
Yes, I do.
okay, multiple participants. And I meant to print out your bio to give you a much more thorough introduction, and I'm so sorry that I failed to do that. I got wrapped up at what I was doing over at the farm and didn't get back to my computer. But I'm really grateful that you're here, and I know you're an adjunct professor at the Hudson Community College or something. What is the
Yeah, so Hudson County Community College in
Hudson
Jersey
County?
City. So I teach for their associate's program in cannabis, and I also teach for Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia, their master's in cannabis science and healthcare. So I teach for both of those schools. I'm also doing an internship on psychedelic clinical trials out in Arizona with Dr. Sue Sisley. I also provide behavioral therapy to children with autism, and I help organize with the Penn Psychedelic Collaborative.
That's awesome. Well, I'm gonna mute my sound, and then if I could ask everyone else to mute, please, and then I will give you the floor. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I do want to make one little correction. I am not yet at the doctorate level. Just have my master's degree. I do appreciate it though, but I'm still getting there. But my master's degree is focused in psychoactive pharmaceuticals and pharmacology, and I've performed preclinical and clinical research on psychedelic substances. So I have pretty fair background on that particular subject. So I will start. I'm going to put on the slide set view, and we can go ahead. So your brain on psychedelics. Here's a quick overview of some of the areas in the brain and the particular mediums associated with acting on those areas in the brain, like touch, taste, body awareness, language, vision, hearing, and smell, all associated and neuromodulated by your serotonin pathways. Whenever I do one of these talks, I always like to give a quick note to historical and traditional use, though it doesn't necessarily have a direct connection with what these things do to your brain. I think it's really important to remember that a commensalistic relationship with these plants and other plants around the world have been used by people in indigenous settings over millennia. And starting to understand the way that these cultures have used them can allow one to map then practices onto neurobiological framework. It's really interesting to see how a lot of things that neuroscience begins to discover, these people have already been implicating the clinical uses for them for millennia without needing neuroimaging or any of that. So I wanted to start off with a brief overview of the serotonin receptor. It is the receptor or neurotransmitter associated with the effects, psychotropic as well as therapeutic benefit associated with psychoactive substances like psilocybin, LSD, and mescaline. This neurotransmitter regulates behavior, mood, memory, sleep, cognition, and feeding in the brain due to its density in particular regions of the brain associated with homeostasis of these bodily functions. Classic psychedelics, like the ones I previously mentioned, agonize this receptor, particularly the receptor subtype 5-HT2A. And the reason it does this is you can look on the left-hand side of the screen. Here's serotonin up top, circled in red. And you can see the similarities in structure between serotonin and something like psilocybin. It has these same two rings. It has the hydroxyl group, which is that OH. And the only difference is where the OH is situated on that second ring. And then it also has this additional line with the nitrogen sticking out. Though there are slight differences between serotonin and psilocybin or psilocin, the main uh, the main similarities in the core structure are just enough that it's able to bind to serotonin receptors like the 5-HT2A and the 5-HT1A receptor. This is what leads to it being able to act on the body in general. Now, the serotonin receptor is found in varying regions across the brain. The two that I'll really focus on are the 5-HT1A and the 5-HT2A because those are the ones that are primarily acted upon by these classical psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin. The 5-HT1A is found in a high density in cortical regions of the brain, which are associated with information reception, processing, and response. So you can think of that as you're able to look at something, receive the information, the light input in through your eyes, and that information is received and processed, and then the associated responses are then triggered by the cortical system in your brain. The 5-HT1A receptor is also found in a high density in limbic structures. This is where you're going to find emotions, motivation, and behavior highly correlated with the response in this receptor. The 5-HT2A is highly distributed in the prefrontal cortex, where you see a lot of decision making and planning, as well as the limbic areas where you also see the 5-HT1A. So this gives you an idea of why the administration of psychedelics, which target these two receptors primarily, start to alter your information reception, your emotions, your decision making, and your planning ability. There are many psychiatric disorders associated with decreased central nervous system and plasma serotonin concentration. They include major depressive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and anxiety disorders. Really, what this is saying is that a decrease in serotonin has been shown to be associated with this list of disorders. And it's interesting when you start to see the list of disorders that psychedelics are proposed to treat. They are exactly the same, and the list is even more extensive. In fact, the serotonin system is a common target for a range of federally approved psychotropic medications like SSRIs and antidepressants like Lexapro and Zoloft. And this graphic I have on this slide is just a little overview. So tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin in your body, and then it's stored in these vesicles. Typically, you would need some kind of nerve impulse, which occurs through a particular stimuli in your brain to release serotonin. This happens in particular cycles, though through exogenous administration or taking something like shrooms or LSD, you're able to stimulate this receptor here, your 5-HT2A or 5-HT1A receptor, without needing to use the stores you already have up here in these vesicles, thereby leading to a response. So once again, these classical psychedelics like psilocybin agonize the serotonin receptor, though they also bind to multiple other receptors. LSD and psilocybin both work on the serotonin receptor, but LSD also agonizes or activates the dopamine receptor. Psilocybin also increases dopamine in the brain, but it does not bind to this receptor. It does so by activation of that serotonin 1A receptor again. Dopamine increases are associated with euphoria, depersonalization, and potential mediums for dopamine activation in order to be used as a therapeutic include increasing attention, motor coordination, and hormone balance. A quick side note is a disorder commonly associated with decreases in dopamine are Parkinson's disease. So that lack of motor coordination and decreases in focus as the pathology begins to increase over time, that shows a doorway for another pathology that could possibly be remediated by something which increases dopamine, like these psychedelics that I mentioned. I'm not going to go too deeply into the other receptors that psychedelics do work on, but I want you all to remember that even though serotonin is a big part of it, it is not the only part of it. And still, things are constantly being found out as research into the mechanism of these drugs are being funded and continuously ongoing. Additionally, psychedelics, classical and non-classical, all increase the release of brain-derived neurotropic factor. This invokes plasticity. So really, this brain-derived neurotropic factor, it's a pretty big mouthful, but it's really a protein that allows you to increase your mental flexibility and increase the amount of brain networks that one region of your brain is able to connect to. This potential increase in connectivity associated can also increase the connectivity between standing brain networks and decrease activity in the default brain network. So I'll go a little bit deeper into the default brain network a little bit later in the slides, but what I want you guys to really understand is that psychedelics are able to invoke this thing called plasticity, which allows you to create new neural frameworks, allow you to take in information differently, to see things in a whole new light, and be able to start getting out of some of the rigid patterning associated with disorder. So, now looking at the idea of disorder and order in the brain, I'll look at a common scientific concept known as entropy. So, entropy is the measure of disorder or uncertainty within a system. Our brain doesn't really like that. It craves homeostasis or order, which is a state of equilibrium for optimal functioning without unnecessary energy use or expenditure. Your brain uses a lot of energy during the day. In a given room, there are so many things for you to attend to and try to understand. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense for your brain to constantly have to make up a new framework for every single thing that you think or do or interact with in a given day. So, in order to create balance over time, your brain starts to target specific signaling pathways which are developed through conditioned responses or things that you become accustomed to over time. You can imagine this picture on the bottom of the screen as I was thinking as like tangled up headphones. You know, when you're first born, you don't really know what to make of anything around you. So the world could seem kind of like tangled up headphones. Even though it's really interesting and you're able to learn so much in a rapid period of time, it becomes incredibly inconvenient every time you go out into the world to untangle those headphones. You start to get to a point where you want to be within a system where you have them tied up in just the right way so you don't need to untangle them every single time you want to use them or every time that you approach something in the world. So, as you become more accustomed to something, it's easier to understand it based on the brain's preconceived framework. So you start to filter through preconceived beliefs and predictions, and they eventually lead to shaping your subjective perception. So every single day, I take the same route to work. And originally, I maybe took a couple wrong turns. And then after a while, I don't even think about it. I just drive to where I'm going. I start to miss out on a lot of the things that I used to look at on my drive to work. Everything around me starts to become filtered out, and that kind of gets shaped into the way we see things. And that can extrapolate to more than just your drive to work. It goes into the way you interact with your people in your life, with the way you approach your job, which the way you approach eating or exercising. Based on the things that have happened to you previously and the things that you've approached in your life, you begin to see that specific thing in one way because it's the most energy efficient way for your brain. But that often can lead into pathology, especially if someone has experiences with trauma in the past. Then the trauma response that they have will be the most energy efficient, or at least seemingly for the brain. And it's very hard to get out of it once you get to a certain point in your life. What psychedelics allow you to do is restructure this. So this looks like a pretty complicated image on the left-hand side of the screen, but it isn't as complicated as it seems. The way I like to look at it is this top layer, layer one, is you receiving information from the outside world. You seeing something that you've never seen before, and by the time you get to this lower level, level 6, then you realize the thing that you think you've never seen is actually a dog walking the street, or it's actually, something moving, or it becomes a little bit more salient. So as you're going through these different layers, you start to approach things less as something new and something to inquire about or look at more deeply or differently, and more based on how you've seen them in the past or the ways you've interacted with them in the past. When you take psychedelics, this layer 6, which houses the way you've previously seen things, the way that you've previously interacted about things, the emotions that you've previously held about things, that becomes incredibly disrupted. So the information that you're taking in is no longer being funneled through a preconceived model. Everything seems new. This can be exciting, this can be scary, this can be euphoric, this can give you a new sense of meaning of the things around you. But essentially what these psychedelics are doing are activating those serotonin receptors again, found within this level in the cortical hierarchy, or the cortex, once again, is where you're receiving information. And it's not allowing you to get to these triangle areas. And so you're just receiving the information as it is. So it looks a lot differently than you've ever been accustomed to, even if you're seeing the same dog that you normally see every single day. What this allows you to do is break free from preconceived paths. Normally, maybe someone with treatment-resistant depression or OCD finds themselves constantly walking in circles that are trudged through, and they may think there's no other way to get out of them because this is the only path that's there. They couldn't even conceive of having to build a new path because your brain is telling you it's not worth the energy. But by disrupting that top layer, psychedelics are allowing you to see the free will and flexibility that is actually allowed. So you're able to go through and repave the path. Disrupting these pathways and inducing plasticity simultaneously is a really incredible thing. Psychedelics do introduce a bit of disorder because your brain is going haywire. It's like, oh my gosh, there's so many new things around me, almost like you're a baby. But the amazing thing about that very young formative state that you're being put into is that you can break free from harmful patterns or even just see things around you in a new light. You're able to essentially set a reset button on your head. Some people use psychedelics for creativity. Some people use them, like I've been mentioning before, to deal with, mental health illness. But either way, the paper that you've been writing or the painting that you've been looking at or the relationship with your mother, father, significant other, all of those things you're able to look at in an entirely new light. This is because of all those neurobiological underpinnings that I was just describing before. Your serotonin receptor, both increasing the protein, which allows for plasticity, and decreasing connection between the thing housing the models of all your preconceived notions, allows you to kind of start anew. This mechanism of action leads to, or potentially can, reduce cravings associated with addiction, improve mood, enhance psychological flexibility, and potentially address some of the core causes of addiction, OCD, anxiety, depression, in addition to a number of other mental health disorders and their associated symptoms. Something else I wanted to mention is, once again, this seems pretty complex, but it isn't as complex as it seems. The thalamus is really the thing connected to, let's say, your optical nerves. And so after you see a bright light or something in your visual field, it's then filtered through your thalamus. And that is then pushed onto your cortical system. And you're like, oh, I know what that is. That's a car. So when you're stimulating your serotonin receptors, your 5-HT2A receptors, it's overloading the cortex. And so you're incredibly sensitive to the things occurring around you. This means an increased sensory perception, cognitive disturbances associated with an influx of information, and ego disillusion. All of these commonly associated with psychedelic states. And I wanted to mention this as well. So these are drugs that have the capacity to work on the same systems associated with memory and mood, cognition, emotion. And they also have the potential to completely restructure them or lead you a malleable, almost like clay like mold to work with after the experience is done. So, what can you do with that? Well, you can do a great deal, and this can lead to prolonged therapeutic effects. You see on the image I have on the left-hand side of the screen, it seems, based on recent research, that the area of or critical learning period that's available after taking a specific psychoactive or psychedelic drug is correlated with the length of time that drug the acute subjective effects or the trip lasts for. So something like ketamine is a lot shorter. Something like psilocybin and MDMA have a similar duration of trip, and something like LSD, where the trip is somewhere between 8 to 10 hours. You'll start to see it map on almost directly with the amount of time in weeks you have a critical period open. This critical period is really, I'm going to go back to that baby analogy again. It's like you're a newborn baby, and you're able to learn things a lot more quickly. You're able to learn new languages, you're able to learn how to walk, you're able to differentiate the people within your family unit and start to form opinions about them. So you can think about it like that. The new things that you want to integrate into your life, let's say with psilocybin, the first 2 weeks after you take that trip, maybe during the trip, you had a revelation about the things happening around you or specific thought patterns that you've been in. This critical period is a time to take action and allow for that plasticity to be rerouted into areas that it would be particularly beneficial for. So if part of the thing that you've noticed that is leading to some of your maladaptive thought patterns is maybe the environment that you're in, then perhaps working with a social worker or a family therapist or consulting with your job to look at location changes within those first 2 weeks and trying to make immediate action that will allow for enduring effects and reroute those cognitive pathways into synaptic systems, which will actually lead to long term benefit. What we see here over is some of the things that have been associated with psychedelic integration. If you look at it from a meta analysis, looking at the natural world, emotional, mental, and contemplative practices, relational, communal practices, bodily and somatic practices, lifestyle actions, spiritual, existential, and ritual. So, all of these contribute to the paths to integration that you can take now that your brain is in a very plastic state. Bodily somatic can go into speaking with a physician about particular lifestyle practices that you would like to integrate into your life after you've come to the realization about them as you were in your acute experience. Relational communal, maybe rebuilding family relationships or speaking with a social worker or family therapist about them. Lifestyle action, if there are particular lifestyle choices that you would like to change. Spiritual, existential ritual, maybe speaking with a pastor, another individual that is associated with spirituality that you would like to get more in touch with. Looking at this from a larger systems framework allows you to really recognize what areas of the brain you have been undernourishing or somewhere in your developmental path were not hardwired to get the energy that they needed. And you, in the long term, are now realizing are contributing to your pathology. So it's not entirely associated with what these things do to the brain, but I always think it's important to mention, yeah, these things cause plasticity, and that has the potential to do a lot of change. And this plasticity and the way that allows you to receive sensory information causes really odd things to happen to your vision and sight and the way your body feels, which is that tripping. But the long-term benefit and what this can actually do from a psychotherapeutic or an overall clinical framework, it's really putting those things into action and doing something with the malleability that we know from a neurobiological level. So that's all I have. I know if you guys have any questions. Stop sharing.
So I'll jump in. I'll be honest, not actually a question. I just want to let you know how much I appreciated this particular talk. You did a really good job of explaining something that's been on I've has kind of been on my mind a lot. Specifically, the importance of the effect it has on neuroplasticity and how that can allow the breaking of patterns, forming of new ones, all of that. You did a great job explaining it. Honestly, I've been very interested. If there's recording of this, I'm probably going to be using it to try to answer some questions I know some people around me have had. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I'll call on Carly.
Hey, I have a traumatic brain injury, and microdosing psilocybin and macrodosing it has been really helpful in my healing, both from the trauma, like PTSD stuff, and regaining my sense of self again. I have a lot of peers that have brain injuries who are really curious, or they're also using it and they're like, I don't even know what to do. What protocol? What do we do here? Um, And I'm just wondering if you have any advice about where to start in terms of maybe like community sourcing some resources or best practices. And also, how do I go about recommending how people can be safe using it? I've personally had a lot of issues with doctors just saying, "Oh, we have no idea. Sorry, I can't tell you anything about this," in terms of like other medications that I used to take. Um, so I just want to be like giving my peers safe and useful advice. That's where I'm going, but just curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience. See, I'll try to address these in order. Well, in terms of sourcing, I feel like following a similar protocol to what the cluster headache, the cluster migraine community does, which is personal sourcing. There's like there's issues with the legality of things.
Yeah.
But I'll say I started out, I would say like I'm an ethnopharmacologist. I work in cultivation as well as pharmacology. And personal sourcing, I think, would be the safest way to go about these things in terms of knowing what you have, making sure there was no contamination while you were growing them. And then there are also resources that I could probably send you. There are websites where you can send stuff in, and you can get them tested if you want to know how much of psilocybin and psilocin are actually in the product that you're growing.
Yeah.
In terms of dosing, and then also contraindications. So I'll talk about contraindications. If you're taking anything like an MAOI or a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, you should not take psilocybin with that because it will lead to an increase in serotonin and that will lead to toxicity.
Serotonin syndrome, then.
Serotonin syndrome, exactly. There are a couple of other drugs that won't necessarily lead to serotonin syndrome, but it can decrease the trip. There are particular there's SSRIs that can do that. I can send you a list of
Oh, you
medications.
have something? That'd be great.
Yeah, I can send you, but the only one that I'm familiar with that will lead to toxic results are those MAOIs.
Okay.
In terms of dosing, what you'll see if you're working with dried mushrooms, if you're microdosing, then it's typically something lower than like it's between like 0.1 to 0.5 grams for a microdose. And then if you're looking for a larger dose, where it's not a breakthrough, but you're starting to feel mild subjective effects, it's about 1 gram. And then if you're looking for a breakthrough dose, it's about 2 to 3.5 grams. And then if you want to take what they call a heroic dose, then it's above 5 grams. If you're looking at it like what they use in clinical trials, they typically use for lower doses 10 milligrams of pure psilocybin. And the higher dose, which they usually use for like treatment resistant depression or PTSD, is 25 to 35 milligrams of pure psilocybin.
Whereas what you said before, that was all just grams of mushroom generally,
Grams of
right?
mushroom, yeah.
Yeah.
And then if you're talking about set and setting, I feel like it's important to have somebody always with you. That is something that from like a safety standpoint, even if it's not somebody who's trained, have somebody that you know with you if this is the first time you're taking a drug. And if it's the first time you're taking a drug, start with those smaller doses. Get familiar with it. See if that's all you need. You don't necessarily need to go to those higher doses if if you get the benefit that you want from smaller doses. I also recommend taking them more infrequently than frequently.
Mm.
Yeah. I feel like beyond that, I'm not I'm not your clinician and I don't know the depth to your pathology. So I don't want to go beyond my scope, but making sure you have someone there, making sure the person that you have there has maybe read up a little bit on keeping someone safe, keeping a helpful eye on them, having a non-judgmental view, being like a compassionate care individual. I think that's also beneficial. But yeah, I'm not going to go too far beyond my scope. Mostly looking at those safety parameters. And if you
Yeah,
want me to, if you want to shoot me your email in the chat, then I can
I
also
will.
send you a list of medications that could potentially decrease the extent of your subjective experience, where it almost blocks out your trip. Trazodone is one of them.
Which is given like candy to people with TBI.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bianca.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so sorry, Anna. I can't hear you.
All right, well, while Anna is figuring it out, let me jump in. And Bianca, first I want to say thank you so much. That was such a concise um, description of everything that I feel like people have been asking for. And I really appreciate your presentation. And Josh, to answer your question, yes, this is being recorded and it will be up on our YouTube, hopefully within the next couple days if I can get to it. Um, I wanted to speak to Carly's question. The A2142 bill builds in an educational course that a consumer would have to take in order to get legal access to either grow or consume psilocybin-containing mushrooms, and that would include the protocols and dosages and resources. So hopefully with that bill, everything that you've asked for, Carly, would be available to people that go through that course. My question
That's
is,
awesome.
so my question, Bianca, is that people talk about the default mode network. Is that I think it was the 2A receptors, or can you speak to a little bit about that? Because I didn't hear you mention default mode network at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, so I talked about it briefly and I said I was going to get back to it. And I think I just got into the flow of the talk. Yeah. So it honestly relates a lot with that disorder and order in the brain that I was mentioning before. So the 5-HT2A receptors are getting you away from that preconceived network and in addition to that, it's like opening up field connectivity. So imagine your brain, your default node network is your default to when I'm not really focusing on anything, this is where my brain goes. And so instead of going to that major hub, you can think of going from one highway to another highway back and forth. It disrupts that stream. So now instead of going to that one highway, you're taking all these other back roads in order to get to the same area. And that is triggered through what I was mentioning before, the disruption of those layer 5 pyramidal cells, and then the increased, uh, I guess, hyperactivity in your cortical cells. But essentially, it's saying you're not going to take the same path that you're used to anymore. You're not going to default into whatever your resting state is. You're going to have to take all of these other areas, and you're not going to go to the super highway. You're going to have to take all the back roads.
I have absolutely loved your analogies.
Yeah.
You such a great. I can picture what you're talking about. That's just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah. Of course. Thank you.
Anna, did you get your sound figured out?
Maybe. Can you hear
Oh
me?
yeah.
Okay. First, I thought I turned my camera off and like shoved my face with pizza. So I'm so sorry if you all were subject to that. I just turned my self view off, so I didn't watch it. So I don't know if that'll be recorded, so I just want to name that. And I so appreciated the slide you had about the critical window. I am a social worker. I'm a psychedelic integration therapist, so that like period of like this is when you can do really great work. But my question is, I guess, if you can speak to how does that change with microdosing versus like these big sort of breakthrough doses? Is in terms of a critical window, does that exist still, or is like what happens in
So
comparison?
the research on critical windows are more commonly done on those breakthrough doses or
Yeah.
at least perceptible doses. The research on microdosing, so it's pretty split on the field where there's a lot of people who microdose and they say they get great benefit from doing it, but the research to this point does not show that there's any large neurological changes associated with microdosing that you would necessarily see with a dose of a gram or higher.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. And then I just wanted to share, looking at that slide with the critical window and even these like subtle changes. A client I worked with ketamine therapy, he's in his 50s. He's had intense OCD, hasn't stepped on a crack since he was 9 years old. And after his second ketamine session, one of his ideas for integration was to walk home stepping on cracks. And that was a year ago, and he has never thought about not stepping on cracks. So like that, these like subtle changes, talking about that like path you don't go down and choosing a different thing, so evident and like powerful. So I just thank you for highlighting that part of it, that it's not just the drug or substance and what it's doing, but what you're doing with it after when you're in that kind of newborn baby stage.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that anecdote and I appreciate the work that you do because it is incredibly important. I always I start off this lecture and any other one that I do with that like note to traditional use and indigenous wisdom because the integration is less explicit. They are already
Right.
based in communal systems.
Yeah.
That's the way their
Yeah.
society is built up. And it's kind of like there's integration immediately after they're doing this as a result of the way their society is structured. We in the West need to be a little bit more intentional about it. We often think because of the way medicine is kind of built up is that you take a drug and the drug makes you better. But there's a lot more work associated with psychedelics, and the only way for us to make sure we're using them in the most respectful way to those societies and then also to ourselves and whatever benefit we're trying to get from them is really making sure that we're shifting our views and shifting our actions towards actually doing something about not just treating the symptoms. Yeah, I'll call on, is Avery again? Is that your hand back up? Okay. Yeah.
Sure. Well, we have another Matt.
Yeah,
Can you hear him?
Matthew here. Thank you. I just want to echo what the others said. I really appreciate how articulate you were in describing the information you presented to us, and how And I am also aware of some of the research being conducted around like heroic doses or more substantial doses versus microdosing. However, is there a correlation in terms of, is there even any research done around, okay, so someone does a heroic dose or a more substantial, 2 to 3 gram dose, but then following it up with like 1 gram every once in a while, almost like a
maintenance dose.
Yeah, like a maintenance type of thing. That's a good. Appreciate the help with that. Has there been any study around that, or because to be honest with you, heroic doses can be risky. When you're going above 5, especially with the different strains people are growing these days, and then there's a lot we don't know. My opinion is, I do not have a PhD or anything like that, but my feeling is there's a lot we don't know in terms of neurological aspects or effects of these drugs in very heavy doses, recovery times and whatnot, pre-existing conditions. So it seems like there can be a risk profile sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great question. So, in terms of what the research is really looking at, their dose range is typically they'll show lower doses, so like almost like a test dose to see if the drug is tolerable to an individual at about 10 milligrams, which you could see is 1 gram. And if the patient is able to tolerate that dose, this isn't in all studies, but a lot of studies I've read usually start out and there's like you have to go through pilot and phase 1 to make sure the drug that you're administering to people is safe. And then they'll go to that like 25 to 35 milligram range, which is like about 2.5 to 3.5 grams of the dried mushroom, if you want to look at it that way. In clinical trials, they're not typically giving people extreme heroic doses of psilocybin. With the microdosing, they're looking particularly at like a lot of them have been qualitative studies over like a period of time of people who report that they're microdosing and they're just not seeing substantial and enduring effects. And when they look back then at the neurobiology of these people, they're not seeing the changes that are associated with the typical therapeutic range that they're giving, that 2.5 to 3.5 milligrams. So maybe there is a benefit, but it isn't as dramatic. And like I mentioned before, this research, like it's only been maybe 20 years that we've been in this renaissance, and to do clinical trials costs millions of dollars. So it just, the funding hasn't been there to get extensive research on microdosing, but what early preliminary data there is not suggesting there's a ton of it. I do think what you're saying is incredibly important. Like taking heroic doses is not necessarily beneficial to everyone, maybe even a large percentage of the population, especially if there's someone who doesn't have the necessary support. A big part of this is like people can go into existential crises, even on smaller doses of psychedelics. Like I said before, like it can be scary to, have to address something that you're used to addressing in a particular way and it look completely different. You don't know what to do. So if you don't have a proper support system, maybe it's a lower dose, maybe it's a higher dose. Either way, you're going to be scared and it could lead to, your downfall rather than benefit. But that's why I've been really trying to emphasize like having people around you that know what you're doing and having like external like clinical care modalities, like social workers, like therapists, like physicians. Even if your physician doesn't know a lot about it, letting people know that you're doing this so that they can help you if something goes wrong is incredibly important. And like I had mentioned to Carly before, if you've never taken something, don't take all of it. Take a little bit of it at a time and slowly work your way up. Because it may seem like the way people, the way things are in the media or on the internet, like, oh, people are just taking a whole bunch of these things. People don't necessarily need to do that. You don't need to be like the person that you saw one time on a YouTube video. just find what's right for you, start slowly, and make sure there are people to care for you.
Yeah, and that analogy of the superhighway of the default mode network, and then suddenly you take an off ramp and you're going down a twisty back road and your lights are off, and that's where it can get like, oh, you've taken a heroic dose, and it's like a one way, you're going the wrong way, and you're like, oh wow, I don't know what's going on. That really is, I feel, that analogy when I'm just taking it, and running with it, but like to me, and then if you're taking like some kind of smaller maintenance dose, if you're in that like scary back road highway, sometimes it's like, oh, something can then reset your reset. You're like, oh, I see a populated neighborhood. Let me drive into this and at least get some lights for a while. And that can, help with that. But like Bianca said, don't ever do that without help. Without a community. Sorry to jump in on you there.
Yeah, no, that was perfect because that's exactly why I like to use the analogies, because it's like take it as far as you can go. And honestly, even like when you're tripping, like having some kind of something to remember what's going on. In like a hypothetical sense, if I was a pharmacologist and I knew what was going on in my brain, it would be a lot easier for me to relax and, oh, this is okay, this is going to pass, and these are the ways that I can help it. So just remembering those basic concepts is very helpful. Yeah, so I'm going to go now to Nicholas. Nicholas, I also can't hear you. I don't know if you're talking right now.
Yeah, you're still muted, Nicholas. Oh. How about while you're figuring that out, Carly, you have your hand up too?
Yeah, I'll go. I recently was talking with a friend with a brain injury. We were talking about microdosing, macrodosing, and she recently did a macrodose, and she kind of reported nothing really happened. I had the same kinds of thoughts, and the next few days I was even more overstimulated than usual. She feels kind of defeated. Whereas she had had a lot of success microdosing in dealing with her TBI symptoms and navigating like her new brain. So I was wondering, A, how do they measure neural activity with psychedelics that you mentioned? And B, I just don't really know how to interpret what she said, what she reported that she didn't have anything happen. I'm guessing things did happen, just maybe like below consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's incredibly fascinating. It was like worth a case study because,
Hmm.
like I was mentioning before, there are certain, maybe she's on a drug. There's something like trazodone. I know you can take a high dose of psilocybin, and there's some interesting case studies. It's just like no perceptible like subjective experience at all. So it's like you're not tripping, even though you took a whole bunch of something that would normally make you trip. Um, so I think that's interesting. And I wonder if there's something associated with her brain injury as well that would then decrease the intensity of her trip or lead her to not actually trip. When it goes to microdosing, so I do know that when you're taking psychedelics for something like cluster headaches, you take a lower dose because you're not looking for something to completely change the way you view things in your world. You're just doing it for it's really for the serotonin system work, and so just like minor activity. I would wonder like how low of a microdose she's taking, because
Mhm.
the microdose that a lot of people will say a microdose, but it's like a range that they're actually taking. So maybe she's taking a low dose that isn't necessarily like a microdose.
And then how do they measure
Oh
the
yeah.
neural activity?
Yeah, so they're usually doing EEG in order to do that.
Mm.
and it's usually partnered with fMRI to see what particular brain region. So EEG to tell like whatever brain waves that particular region of the brain is having when you're under the influence, and then the fMRI is telling you like, oh, you are having beta activity in your prefrontal cortex or your thalamus. So it's able to kind of map on together. So usually they use them partnered.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I have to head out, but I'm gonna find you on LinkedIn and then give you my email then too about the contraindications packet you have.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you,
Okay,
Carly.
thanks.
Nicholas, did you get your sound figured out?
I don't think so, unless you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Hello? Okay, so yeah, it's just I had to be a little bit closer. My gain must be poor right now. I want to say thank you very much for the presentation. You brought me back to my college classes for some of the material. That was very excellent. I just wanted to ask if you know of any studies that they've done where they also included like some of the entourage along with it, like some of the metabolic precursors like baeocystine and norbaeocystine, instead to see how that affects the therapeutic ability of this.
So I love the question. Love the question so much. They don't there is currently a phase 1 study in the works, looking at some of the stuff that you're asking about in clinical models. Currently, there's no published work on that. So there's no published work in clinical models. There's published work on when they started doing preliminary natural product research on these are the compounds found in mushrooms. But I can tell you nobody's really doing that work. I think it's an incredibly useful thing to do because it's not just psilocybin and psilocin. The experience may seem similar, but if I were to, extrapolate or hypothesize, those things also have a contributing effect. It's like you think of something like cannabis, where if
Yeah,
you
exactly.
yeah, exactly. If you have cannabis and you have THC and you're only trying to think about, oh, well, this is making me high. So if I just have pure THC, it would also make me high. But then if you're really looking at some of the the modulatory mechanisms going on, oh well, CBD is decreasing inflammation, and this CBG is increasing my immunomodulatory effect, and so it's incredibly important, and it's not necessarily perceptible, but unfortunately, the research is still beginning on a lot of that stuff. Hopefully, it gets to the point, especially with like increasing access as community scientists start taking pure psilocybin. Maybe they have had experience with the natural product, or if there are studies eventually funded to look at those particular things that you're bringing up. But if I were to guess, yes, there is a contributing factor. Is there research that I can point you in the direction in? Unfortunately, no. The best I could do is really early ethnopharmacologic stuff, which is like, this is how much of this compound we found in the mushrooms that we first surveyed.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of my own readings into this, and that was one of the things I was coming up with. I was like, they're doing all these studies on just the isolated
Mm-hmm.
like psilocybin and psilocin and things like that. I was like, there is a whole bunch of metabolic precursors and other like co-modulants that are going to be in mushrooms or that are going to be in other foods even to be able to affect this, kind of like how the triterpenoids affect like people's the influence of like cannabinoids on people. So I was wondering if things have gotten there yet because I hadn't seen anything in my own lookings on that. You're definitely deeper into it than I am. So
Yeah. Well, and that's
Well, yeah.
one of the things that Dr. Michael Bug, he's in the Committee for Medicinal Mushrooms with me for the North American Mycological Association, and he just wrote this entire paper on the importance of including the entire mushroom for everything, for lion's mane, for turkey tail, for all these things, over just some type of narrow extraction because of the entourage effect in all of these variety of mushrooms, whether they're functional or, and adaptogenic or active and, impactful in that way. So, and I think that that's one of the things that there's a huge opportunity for, and that really hasn't been studied in Western science at all, because we're always so focused on, oh, let me just extract this one molecule and then like, here's your penicillin, because that's, I only want to give you this one thing instead of like all of this other stuff. So I do feel like there's opportunity there, and hopefully we will get there. And
Yeah,
that's
I
one of,
understand why they do it. Like, it's hard to, we have to, like, on a pharmaceutical level, we have to prove that this single compound is what is, they want a cause effect, be able to, like lineage to be able to show that this does this. And it's difficult when you have when you have this broad spectrum dosage for things. So I understand why they'd start off this way, but I was just curious if it progressed further yet.
yeah, Bianca, you mentioned, testing facilities for potency. Do you know if there are any in New York? Because, I mean, you were at the hearing. That's one thing that we are going to be concerned with moving forward, no matter what type of access gets approved, is making sure that the products that we're providing to people have known contents of, certain substances. So do you know if there are?
So I'm not familiar with any in New York. I am familiar with a company out in Oakland, and I want to see if they have like the ability to, like, where you can send in samples. Because I thought about this a lot after the hearing, because like I worked in growing for, I'm a cultivation person at heart, and I work a lot with the lab testing and compliance. And a lot of like the heavy metal testing and the microbial testing for any like extraneous microbials are the same, they're the same samples that you would necessarily use in your mass spec machine that you would for something like cannabis. And then you would just need to get it in like a couple other vials in order for them to then test like psilocybin content and biocystine content. But it seems like the same facilities could expand services and then just have particular test samples for things or like contaminants that are particular to psilocybin. It's like they already have centers that are dedicated just for cannabis, and if you just expand that out for something like psilocybin, it seems like you could kind of kill two birds with one stone, because you already have these very expensive facilities. If I was like working on building that framework, that's something that I would suggest, because when you're using those machines, you just need to make sure that they have like that molecule within their system, and then it's able to pick up that molecule.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, it is after 8 o'clock already, and I don't want to use up any more of your time, Master Schnarr. Does anyone have any last minute questions? I do have a few other like logistical things that I kind of wanted to go over, but I don't want to keep anybody too much longer. So does anyone online have any other questions? No, fantastic. Anybody here? No? Cool. Absolutely amazing presentation, and I value your presence here greatly. And I mean, I hope that we can continue to work together on this. This is we're doing some more things. If you want to stay tuned, we'll
Yeah.
hear a little bit about it. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Avery, really.
Cool. Well, like the only other things, I'll try to keep it brief because we've already gone an hour. That was so fascinating. I mean, I certainly answered a lot of my questions, and that the highway analogy is something that I am going to play with a lot. So, yeah. The microdosing collective dinner, as I mentioned, was really successful. And while the dinner itself didn't bring in enough money, or only enough money to cover like the food expenses and the collective's travel expenses, they still decided to donate NYMHA some cash. So we are now pretty flush with money, and we're using it to do some back end filing things. But we're also going to start a real like kind of educational campaign to start, activating more people across the state. Because one of the things that we've heard from again and again and again is when we talk to lawmakers, they're like, oh, well, this sounds like something that's really important, but we haven't heard from our constituents on this. And so getting people in the Finger Lakes region, in the Adirondacks region, and even downstate in the city to actually contact their legislators is really what's important. So if everybody on this call and in this room knows people in any of those other regions, make sure you say, hey, this is something that is happening in New York. Like I don't know, I like to be a pessimistic optimist, but they're really excited about how this can help impact the mental health and well-being of our first responders and veterans all across the state. And they're really interested in making sure that people get safe, guardrailed access to this. And so telling, friends in all across the state that, hey, tell your lawmaker how that this is an important thing. You don't have to have like too much information. Just be like, look at this bill. Here's A 2142. If you haven't been to our website, the NYMHA, NYMHA.com, there's a whole sample letter and a link that allows you to find your local lawmaker. If you are in this area here in the Capital Region, all of the senators and assembly members are already pretty supportive. So even Phil Steck, who is on the Substance Abuse Committee, he said he's not going to co-sponsor it, but if it comes up to a vote, he would vote for it. Which if you know Phil Steck, that is an absolutely glowing response. Which, Joe McKay, I think I saw him on the call. He told his story, and because he stood there like this at first and was like, oh, okay, I see why this is necessary. That's all it takes, is we just need to get the people in the room to hear information like what Bianca just shared with us. Why it's important to get those people out of those rumination cycles that are stuck in repeating behavior patterns and allow them to pave a new road. Because that's how people can get out of those traps that allow people to step on cracks again. It's really important. So with money that's coming in from this microdosing collective, and we're doing another dinner in mid-December, which hopefully will generate even more attention and capital. We're going to start doing a button online that allows us to capture people who've used its information, and it immediately sends their specific lawmaker a scripted letter. So instead of going to a website, copying and pasting, clicking on a link, finding your lawmaker, sending an email, that's like 7 steps. I got bored explaining it, no one is going to do that. So, but this is just one click and it sends that information out. It costs like $15,000 to get that. So that's one of the real huge like lobbying assets that is out there, but it takes money. So hopefully we can get to that tier and be able to even use that for like a year, because I feel like we've generated enough interest around the state that we can really start, telling people that all you gotta do is hit this one button and boop, it sends everyone the information. Because we did a change.org survey, and in less than a year, we had like, I don't know how many, like it was over 1,000 or thousands of people had signed it, but that doesn't go anywhere. You have to actually like take the change.org and show it to people. And even so, it's like, okay, a couple thousand people. Like we need like hundreds of thousands of people to sign this. And really, that's great, but you really need hundreds of thousands of people to tell their lawmakers, be like, yo, get on this bill or talk about this. And really, Reconsider is a group that has filmed the testimony of multiple people. And we were able to do a couple like showcases where, we had Joe McKay and a retired New York SWAT team member, Ethan Abend, who got a TBI, and he, reset his life with some psilocybin. And, just like here, these are like clips that people can watch right now. They're on YouTube, but we have to get people in the room or like to those links. And so that's why we're trying to build these resources for people to share and then, to send to their lawmakers. Later in October, New York is leading the Northeast Alliance for Psychedelic Access meeting. And so we have been meeting with activists and advocates from Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. And it's all these people are building a body of shareable resources, like access to the survey, the research. We have a database of all these research things that have happened. And so like, here's something that we can share with all these advocates in all of these other states. And so I know that's taking it out of New York, but like, if we can get the region interested in talking about it, that can only help what's going on. And if you haven't heard, Massachusetts basically took the A2142 bill and copy and pasted it into their system. And they had a hearing on September 29th, one day before the New York hearing, and it was received very positively. I think Joe was even he was at both hearings. So, it's gaining traction, this idea that we can safely give educated consumers access to these substances and allow them to decide whether they, want a professional facilitator, or if, Carrie's just going to sit and hold my hand when, if I'm freaking out, and she can, call, what is the Fireside Project? Because the Fireside Project, have you guys heard of that? I mean, that is even a resource that I think should be shared, with these lawmakers. Is like, hey, if someone's on their own and taking is suddenly taking a side trip and their headlights went out and they don't know what to do, but you can call this number and there are trained people that can be like, hey, you're gonna be okay, it's gonna be over in a little bit, like, and they can be on the phone with you while you're traveling down that side road and trying to figure out, how to get back on the highway. So like, there are resources that already exist that is, accessible to people right now. And I think that that's important that we share with lawmakers too. So if you have not yet watched the hearing, the October 10th was the deadline to submit all the written testimony. And I think we had almost like 24 people present, or maybe at least it was over a dozen people in the room present to lawmakers. And we all submitted written testimony, but there were people that couldn't make it that also submitted written testimony. So we've created now a real strong body of testimony that is part of the official New York legal record in support of getting people access to this. But we have to convince lawmakers to look at it. So that's part of like, here's this testimony, here's this hearing, like, if you're telling your friends, if you're telling people across New York, hey, so, to have your lawmakers support this, say like, hey, support this, and you can get more information by just watching this hearing. It's right on the New York Assembly.gov/hearings or something like that website, and you can watch all 5 riveting hours, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it was I was so engrossed the entire time. It just flew by. So Senator Salazar was supposed to join us today remotely. Unfortunately, she double booked herself because she's doing a campaign launch party between 6 and 8, like tonight. So she has decided to join us next meeting, which is going to be November 11th. And she is the same as sponsor in the Senate. So she's sponsored S5303. That's just the number of the bill in the Senate. And she's going to be here and talk to us about why it's important for her and how she feels she feels we need to do to get the Senate to pass access for this bill. So if you're interested in hearing from her, tune in on Tuesday, November 11th. Let's see. Talked about Microdosing Collective, talked about the hearing. I think that was all I had. I kind of rambled really fast. Does anyone have any other questions, comments, concerns? Let's see, who else is on here? Patrick, Joe McKay, Andrew Torres, all right. So Andrew, we should sit down soon and look at some finance stuff. We're putting together a pitch deck for the Microdosing Collective to send to potential investors. And if anyone else is interested in getting this pitch deck, if you have someone that you know that might have a few $100,000 shoved under a mattress and they don't know what to do with it, we definitely are refining this because it's going to be outlined, like what concrete things we will do with an investment in order to encourage lawmakers to make the right decision and approve access for these life-changing substances. Awesome. So if no one else has any other questions, that's pretty much it. So once again, thank you so much, Master Schnarr. I really appreciate your presence and I can't wait to interact with you again. And thank you all for tuning into our meeting.
Yeah, thank you again, Avery.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye all.
Thank you both.
Take care, guys.
Take care.
All right, how do I escape? Okay.
So